Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Be Green with Amy. I'm Amy. After adopting a whole food plant-based lifestyle, my hubby Rick and I lost over 130 pounds. Now I coach others on their plant-based journey. Just Task Voice. Let's welcome our guest.
Dr. Peter Rogers is a Stanford and Harvard-educated MD who for over 30 years has helped people optimize performance for school, sports, and health. He is an imaging-guided surgeon and neuroradiologist who's written nutrition, medical, and study skill books. Today, Dr. Rogers joins us to explore the fascinating connection between the foods we eat and their impact on mental health and psychiatric illnesses. Please click like to help Be Green with Amy. Welcome, Dr. Peter Rogers.
Greetings, Green Warrior, and welcome back, Dr. Rogers.
Thanks.
Well, today we're joined by Dr. Rogers, who's been a monthly guest, and he's going to explore the fascinating connection between the foods we eat and their impact on mental health and psychiatric illnesses. And this is a little bit different from what he has done in the past. On a previous broadcast, he discussed how food impacts mood. But now we're diving even deeper. And this is very interesting because there's so many people out there that are either experiencing psychiatric illnesses or have a loved one, family member, friend. We all know somebody that may be currently on medications. And some of this can be a bit hopeless because sometimes these medications are not exactly what we would like them to be. And sometimes they are necessary, but wouldn't it be nice if we could learn more about other things that impact these mental illnesses and psychiatric illnesses? So let's welcome you, Green Warrior. Please tell us, where are you watching us from today? And if you have a question for Dr. Rogers, please go ahead and put that in the comments, and we will be asking him a little bit later in the broadcast. But in the meantime, just tell us where you're watching from. We would like to know and join our green community. So, Dr. Rogers, what I like to do is just have one true or false question, and then we're going to get on with your presentation.
It's time for True or False on Be Green with Amy Live. Answer true or false to Amy's questions in the comments below, and Amy will ask our guest for the expert answer.
All right, Green Warrior, true or false, the foods you eat can directly influence your mood and mental health. So that's a broad question, but I'd like to see what your thoughts are about that. And you can answer true or false, and you can even put a comment in with that answer. And while the Green Warriors are doing that, Dr. Rogers, tell us a little bit about that before we get into your presentation.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that food can affect your mood. For example, psychological stress increases the hormones cortisol and catecholamines. Well, guess what? Caffeine does the same thing. So caffeine adds to your stress. That's why I always laugh if somebody's stressed out and they said they want a cup of coffee. I'm just like, you're just adding to your stress. That's not so smart. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that will increase the activity of neurotransmitters in your brain. There's a concept, of course, of things like aspartame, the artificial sweetener. That aspartate is an excitatory amino acid. It functions as a neurotransmitter. It actually is a neurotransmitter in the brain. So that's going to cause increased excitatory activity in the postsynaptic neuron. And the point I'm saying is all of these things, sleep deprivation, psychological stress, aspartame, caffeine, you're ramping up your brain's activity level, and you're doing it for no reason. Okay, like if I'm walking through the forest down a path and I see a bunch of coyotes, I have a reason to be stressed out and ready to run, fight or flight. But if you're just doing it with caffeine, with aspartame, glyphosate, the stuff in the non-organic food, non-organic soy, for example, that's also an excitotoxin. Excitotoxin means it increases the activity of the neuron that receives that as a neurotransmitter. And there's a whole bunch of other things. So all these things are going to ramp up your level. So they're going to cause insomnia. They have a tendency to cause headaches. Insomnia puts you into a vicious cycle where then the next day your catecholamines and your cortisol are elevated. So you keep on staying in a hyper-excited, agitated state. And a lot of young people find themselves in that pretty routinely. And it's bad. You don't want that. So that's just one example. There's a whole bunch more. I mean, believe me, I got a lot of stuff on this topic.
Well, good. That's what we want to know, because there's a lot of questions that we have, and traditional medicine has not always been able to provide the answers. And so you have a presentation, and I'm not seeing it yet. I know that you're sharing your screen. But
I do have it. You want me to share it? Here it is.
Please. Okay. So Green Warriors, get ready for this presentation and let us know in the chat if you have any questions. While the presentation is going, I'll save all your questions in the chat. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, Dr. Rogers, you can begin.
Okay, I'm going to start out with the concept of a parallel universe. So imagine these are two people, could be you and with someone you love, okay? And basically you're looking out over this other universe. And the little secret I'm going to tell you today is you can actually enter the other universe, and it's better than the one we currently function in most of the time when you understand it, okay? So I kind of was reminded of the idea from Through the Looking Glass, the book by Lewis Carroll, that she could go to the other side of the mirror. The looking glass is the mirror, and see things from a totally different way. And I started getting this idea when I was looking at internal medicine. I got a little older. My kids are grown up. I sort of changed from being primarily a surgeon to primarily a neuroradiologist. And I had a little more time, and I'm reading through the books, and I'm like, oh my God, these internal medicine books, they're all stupid. They're all a joke. All the Ivy League textbooks, they're all stupid joke. And you say, well, how could I say that? That's so arrogant. And the reason I would say that the internal medicine textbooks are a joke is because for all the chronic diseases, they say about the same thing, and it's completely untrue and stupid. If you look up hypertension, it'll say, well, the vast majority of hypertension is of unknown cause, 90 to 95%. Therefore, it's called essential hypertension. You may also call it idiopathic hypertension. And you know what idiopathic means? It means the doctor's an idiot and the patient's pathetic, okay? So they say, well, we do know it's associated with aging. And we do know that it seems to be partly genetic. And it also, in some instances, appears to be related to socioeconomic disparity. And you're like, well, oh, gee, isn't that thoughtful? But it's a crock of BS, okay? In 1929, the Lancet Journal, Donison paper, 1,800 consecutive admissions in Kenya, black patients, okay, that ate a plant-based diet. What was the incidence of hypertension? 0, okay? And then you're like, you read diabetes. No one knows what causes diabetes. And then you look, gee, back in 1927, J. Shirley Sweeney showed that it was due to high-fat diets, getting the medical students to fail their oral glucose tolerance test. And it goes on in internal medicine. Okay, so then I always thought, well, psychiatry maybe is different. My dad was a psychiatrist. He's a pretty smart guy. When I was growing up, my dad was like my hero. I knew that he was valedictorian of his high school. And, he was also like a boxing champion in the United Kingdom. He won some tournament. And so I kind of like envisioned myself as being like my dad. I was student athlete of the year at Stanford for being a wrestler. And anyway, so I had considered going into psychiatry. And I started to learn more about psychiatry. And the more I learned about psychiatry, the more it's like internal medicine. It's a big joke. So here's Alice from Alice in Wonderland, and she talks to the caterpillar. She asks him a question. He just blows smoke at her, okay? And so what I'm saying is, what's the cure rate for internal medicine or hypertension, diabetes, coronary artery disease? It's 0, okay? The patient always has to be on meds and eventually typically goes for surgery. And psychiatry will say that it does cure some patients, that it does sometimes cure depression or some of these other disorders. But I wonder if it's really curing these patients or if the patient's just getting better on their own despite the drugs, okay? And what happens to a doctor, you get in the business, and basically there's some big money in the medical business. If you do what the drug companies want, you sell a lot of drugs, you do what the insurance company wants, and you structure your job, or your hospital or clinic structures your job so you generate a lot of billing codes, you make money. The insurance company has money. The drug companies have money. But guess what? Patients don't really have any money. Patients are a bunch of poor people. They can say thank you. Not many patients pay out of pocket. But basically, they're a bunch of peasants, the proles, okay? And nobody really cares about them. If you go to a medical meeting at any hospital or clinic in the Western world, they're going to sit there and they're going to talk about productivity, efficiency. And there's going to be some bean counter, okay? And the bean counter is going to come out, and the bean counter is going to say, so-and-so hospital on the other side of town or in the state right next to us, they are generating more billing codes per hour than we are. How come we're not generating as many billing codes as them? Are you guys lazy? Are we disorganized? What's the matter? And there'll be pressure to generate more billing codes. So there's pressure constantly. Go faster, go faster, go faster. You will never hear them talk about outcomes because no one's ever going to talk about outcomes on chronic disease, because if they did, somebody would come along with a low-fat vegan diet and just kick their butts and have better results in them. So they can never do that. They can never have a meeting or a negotiation based on outcomes because they would always lose for chronic disease. I mean, conventional medicine calls these diseases chronic diseases, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, because they can't cure them. And what I see is sort of what I would describe it as a descent into idiocracy. This is a TV show. I think it's in England or something. Here's the surgeon. He's a bariatric surgeon, and he has all these fat patients. And on the TV show, the fat patients do stupid stuff, and then he kind of yells at the fat patients and makes fun of them. But the double joke of the situation is the bariatric surgeon is a big fatso himself. So he's maybe, about not quite 100 pounds overweight, but pretty fat, and his patients are hundreds and hundreds of pounds overweight. And what I'm trying to say is this is high-tech medicine. People think, you got to be smart to make it through pre-med. You got to be smart. To be a doctor, you have to be a hard worker. You don't need to be that smart. I say that, and that's important to realize because an incredible, incredible amount of stupid stuff goes on in medicine. Now, here's a Harvard psychiatrist who's now starting to say he thinks more and more mental illness might actually be due to a lousy diet. So I think that's a good start. Another Harvard psychiatrist, and there's a whole bunch of other ones, Ivy League and other places, they're now starting to talk about diet and mental illness. And they do one thing good. They say, people need to get off the processed food. So that is a big step in the right direction. But they're all really juvenile and ignorant in their knowledge of nutrition, and they're talking about the keto diet or these high-fat versions of the Mediterranean diet. One other just examples, this has come out of Boston. This is a lady named Ann McKee. She's a neuropathologist, looks at autopsied brains. She became very famous because all these NFL football players who had what is called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, dementia due to chronic head trauma, very much like the boxer's dilemma, dementia pugilista from fighting, head trauma. Anyways, out of 111 NFL football players who thought that they became demented because of all their head trauma in football, them or their families, they donated their brains to her autopsy research facility in Boston. And 110 out of 111 NFL football players had CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So obviously head trauma is a bad idea. I wouldn't let my kid play any sport. Football is a lot of fun. It's the most fun sport. It's a great sport for having fun. And flag football is a lot of fun, but you don't get head trauma. When you start playing tackle football, you get head trauma. Okay, so one of the things I would mention is that there are some doctors now who become rather prominent for trying to help these patients. And when I look at them, the ones I've seen, all of them are recommending things like Mediterranean diet, which is idiotic. It's stupid. All you got to do is look close to the Mediterranean diet. It's a high-fat diet. It's got alcohol in it, neurotoxin wine. It's got olive oil, canola oil, major toxins to the vascular system. It's really quite stupid. It includes, dairy and meat, and it's just what people say when they don't know what they're talking about. And some people say there's parallels between the United States and ancient Rome when it was collapsing in its decadence. And there's several different reasons why Rome gradually went down the tubes. One of them was that, lead, the scientific symbol is PB for plumbing, because they had lead pipes. So people were getting lead intoxicated, especially the aristocrats that had running water. Okay, I'm going somewhere with this, and just getting back to medicine. All the pressure on a doctor is go faster, go faster, go faster. When a doctor's in medical school and in the beginning of residency, they're sort of focusing on just try to do things right, try to get the right answer, try to successfully complete a surgical procedure, try to successfully interpret a film, a CAT scan, an MRI. But the farther along they go, it becomes about move the meat. Move the meat as fast as you can, which means go faster and faster and faster. Because the faster you go, the more billing codes you generate, the more money you make. The faster you go, the sooner you can go home. And doctors tend to have a giant workload piled on just beyond what regular person could understand. And this is the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. And the Red Queen says, Alice says, we're going so fast, but we don't seem to get anywhere. And the Red Queen says, in order to stay in one place around here, you have to run. And so that's what life is like for a doctor. Most doctors, they're exhausted. By the time they finish residency, they want to start a family, have a child. And then they have to work their tails off to try to make partner in their groups in private practice, for example. So they take a lot of weekend and night call. They're just totally exhausted. They're not going to read anything. And then you say, well, why don't they learn about nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology? It doesn't get taught in med school or residency. So if they're ever going to learn it, they have to do it on their own. And it's not likely they're going to learn it anytime soon when they come out of their initial training, residency, and fellowship, because they're so exhausted. They're trying to start their family. They're trying to make partner at their job. They really do not have time, and there is no reward for it whatsoever. But there might come a time where by some fluke, I got fat and I had to learn my way out of being fat. My parents were sick and I wanted to try to help them. And I liken this to Alice falling down a rabbit hole, okay, sort of into a different parallel world, if you will, an underground world or parallel world. And one of the scenes is where there's, let's call it the red pill and the green pill. And basically she sees that in the conventional way of doing things, the patients just end up on more and more pills. And the whole system is designed to just force people to do things they don't want to do. Versus she sees, she's beginning to see, maybe there's a better way to get better results. And maybe she should learn about that. Because like when I was a kid, I saw a cartoon. And it was making fun of a person. They went to a witch doctor and the witch doctor gave them a magic potion. And the gist of the cartoon is that they were a stupid idiot for going to the witch doctor who gave him a magic potion. But my sense is, how is that different from internal medicine? The patient goes to a doctor and they get a magic potion called a drug, okay? And in reality, they're really being turned into a cow. One of the things they joke about in, fairy tales and literature like Pinocchio, when Pinocchio behaved like an idiot with the other bad boys, he became a donkey, okay? And he grew ears like a donkey, okay? And what I'm saying here, what does conventional medicine do? It turns the patient into a cow, where basically every day they have to pay money and take their drug. The system milks them like a cow and takes their money. And they don't ever get better. And I wrote the word chump on the side of the cow because they're being a chump. They had a chance to be cured, and instead of being cured, now they're stuck on a pill every day that's going to have side effects. And when you look quite close at the scientific foundation for internal medicine, and what I more recently, I knew about internal medicine a long time ago, but my more recent studying of psychiatry, I actually kind of knew psychiatry was a joke for a long time, but it's the closer you look at psychiatry, the bigger joke it becomes. And the relevance is, if you've got a mood disorder or someone in your family has a so-called mental illness, you want to know about this parallel universe because it has a better chance to heal them and it's less likely to hurt them. So, the queen was always threatening Alice, and finally Alice says, oh, you're nothing but a pack of cards, okay? And for solving a problem, you start out very much like the Indian proverb, 5 blind men and an elephant or 6 blind men and an elephant. And initially, you don't have enough to put it all together. The guy holding the tail says it's a rope. The side says it's a wall. The tusk says it's a spear. The ear says it's a rug. So anyways, you have to kind of look at a big problem from multiple different directions. And then you start to get a bird's eye view like this painting here, Wanderer Above the Sea Fog by Caspar David Friedrich. And then you can start to perceive things objectively. So we'll talk a little bit about how psychological problems are currently handled. They're typically run through something called the DSM, Diagnosis and Statistics Manual for Psychiatry, which pretends to be scientific. This guy did a good video on it. You can just find this on YouTube pretty easily, or you can buy his book here, James Davies. And what he showed was that the DSM is basically a joke. A couple psychiatrists met together, they sat down, and they said, what should we define depression as? What should we define attention deficit as? What should we define oppositional defiant disorder? What should we define, OCD, all these disorders? They just had a conversation and agreed on them. There's not like a scientific validity to these things. Okay, so then what does it all lead to? Psychiatry differentiated itself from psychology by the fact that psychiatrists could prescribe drugs. Drugs are worth a lot of money. Talk is cheap. You don't get paid much for talking. That's for the low-life psychologists to do. The big shot MD psychiatrists, they can prescribe drugs. So that's what they want to do. And they describe themselves as biological psychiatry, and the DSM And about 1980 is sort of when it made a big move to get more and more so-called biological, prescribing drugs and trying to claim that it really knew what it was doing. This guy right here is considered by a lot of people the best psychiatrist who ever lived. His name is Peter Breggin. He wrote a bunch of books. He was a Harvard-trained psychiatrist. One of his books is called Brain Disabling Treatments in Psychiatry, and he said that all psychiatric treatments cause a lobotomy. That's not a misstatement. All psychiatric treatments cause a lobotomy. He said all the drugs, either slowly or quickly, progress towards a lobotomy. He says electroshock is an electric lobotomy. There are surgical procedures that he says are surgical lobotomies. All right, so some drugs are worse than others, like the antipsychotics used to treat schizophrenia and psychotic breakdowns, as a prelude to schizophrenia. Those can rapidly cause a lobotomy, okay? Most of the other drugs, it's a more gradual process. And it's not just Breggin, it's anybody who's studied the subject in some detail. This is another real smart lady, Grace Jackson. By the way, you just go on YouTube, just type their names and you'll see videos by these people. They're pretty widely available. She's not as available in her videos, but she's a smart lady. She wrote this book, Drug-Induced Dementia. I read both of these books cover to cover. This one is sort of a more sophisticated analysis of the neuropathology. This is a more extensive summary of just the clinical outcomes. And they both show that psychiatric drugs are a disaster. The longer a person's on them, the more they essentially get like a lobotomy equivalent. Okay, now here's a guy, his name's Kyle Murphy. He himself had a psychotic episode when he was younger, and he almost had the equivalent of a mild chemical lobotomy, and he felt like he had lost his personality, lost his memory, and then he tried to recover himself. And it took him years, but he said, you know what? This stuff almost killed me. I'm gonna use what I learned to try to help other people. So he runs this place called Alternative to Meds Center, and he has a good YouTube channel, Alternative to Meds. And I'm not telling you I agree with all this stuff. I haven't found any book by him, and I haven't watched all his videos, but I just watched a few, and there were some things I like. Okay, this is from his website. They test the patient when they come in for heavy metals and other neurotoxins. That's worth doing. I mean, if you find out they're intoxicated from eating fish, they got mercury, you can tell them stop eating fish. If you find out they're intoxicated from lead, you could test their water. So you could figure out, potentially what's causing the problem. So I thought that was a good, logical thing, because psychiatrists, a lot of times, they just start prescribing drugs. They don't even check for anything. Oh, it's a mental illness according to DSM, whatever it is, diagnosis 1, 2, 3, or 4, take this pill. Versus, I like this idea of start doing some lab tests on the patient. Try to find out if there is, an organic cause, something fixable. Okay, this guy, Robert Whitaker, he's written a real good book here, and he summarizes a lot of the complications of psychiatric drugs. He goes through how all these kids are messed up from taking these stimulants like Ritalin, and he goes through all the problems, benzodiazepines, and other drugs in psychiatry. It's a good book. And so I'll just make the point, this idea of treating kids with amphetamines is insane. Okay, if you went on the street corner and you sold amphetamines to somebody, that would be against the law, okay? But then you're going to give them to little children? It's insane. Insane. And quite often, not with a lot of testing. You basically got some public school teacher, and she's annoyed because the kid keeps goofing off in class. So she says he's a problem child, sends him to the nurse, and then the school gets more money if they can, get these kids hooked on drugs. The psychologist needs something to do. Oh, yeah, he's attention deficit, behavior disorder, hyperactive, learning disability. Great. Get more money for the school. Okay, and in the meantime, drug the crap out of the poor kid and give him brain damage. And I also say, look, I would have been one of those kids when I was young. When I was in third grade, I was declared, hyperactive. I was put into the equivalent of solitary confinement, where I had to sit in what was called a pod classroom in those days, all by myself. I had nothing to do. I hated it. I hated going to school. I would just read all the books. They were called SRA, Scholastic Reader Achievement, or something like that. And I read all of them. But they did that for 2 years. I was like in solitary confinement. What do I think was the real problem? I think I was just smart. I could do the homework in 5 seconds. And then I want to joke around, make my friends laugh. Okay. Luckily, that was, I'm 60 years old. So that was before they started drugging everybody. Otherwise, they probably would have recommended me for drugs. All right. So like I said, this idea of giving amphetamines to children, they often end up chronic psych patients, cognitively impaired. And the kid goose off in school because it's not normal for a little boy to sit there listening to some stranger lady for 8 hours going blah, blah, blah. So he gets a little hyper in his chair. So you're going to drug the crap out of the kid. It's insane. Okay. And nobody cares about these kids. Nobody's speaking up for these kids. You know, these public teachers say they care about the kids. What are they doing to help these kids? Nobody does anything about it. And then the Ivy League doctors, all they got to do is kiss butt to the drug company, say, oh, we found out that children aren't just hyperactive, they're also bipolar. Give them another medication. So basically, they're drug dealers for children. It's insane. Okay, these kids have very poor long-term outcomes. Whitaker documents that pretty clearly. This guy, Thomas Schaas, wrote a really good book like back in the 1960s, A Myth of Mental Illness. He's a brilliant psychiatrist. Here's some of the things he said. Psychotherapy is the medicalization of human problems, human social problems. 100%. Psychoanalysis is medicalization squared. And psychiatry is medicalization cubed. Mental hospitals are cemeteries for the living dead. The dormitory beds are the grave sites. The psychiatric diagnosis is the gravestone, and the psychiatrist is the gravedigger. The patient is the corpse. In the animal kingdom, the rule is to eat or be eaten. In the human kingdom, it is define or be defined. He who defines dominates. The less a person knows about the workings of the social institutions of a society, the more they have to trust them, trust those who wield power. And the more they trust those who wield such power, the more vulnerable he becomes to becoming their victim. Okay? Because I see that all the time. These, country rubes, country bumpkins walk into these big giant hospitals. They look like the modern cathedral of science. Okay? And they're all impressed at all the bells and whistles. Oh, what a big CAT scanner you have, my dear. What a big MRI machine you have, my dear. What a big operating room you have. Wow, this is so impressive. Yeah, the better to take all your money, you stupid chump. Okay, Schaas continues. Those who suffer from and complain of their own behavior are usually classified as neurotic. Those whose behavior makes others suffer are usually classified as psychotic. In the past, men created witches. Now they create mental patients. Psychiatry belongs in the same category as astrology. It is pseudoscience. Pseudoscience, that is a correct statement. Saying a patient has a mental illness is very similar to saying they are possessed by the devil. Giving children medications for psychiatric conditions is not treatment. It is poisoning. Self-respect to the soul is as oxygen to the body. Deprive a person of oxygen and you kill his body. Deprive him of self-respect and you kill his spirit. As the internal combustion engine runs on gasoline, so the person runs on self-esteem. If he's full of it, he's good for the long run. If he's partly filled, he'll soon need to be refueled. And if he's empty, he will come to a stop. Clear thinking requires courage rather than intelligence. Jung and Adler, they were an improvement on Freud, but they don't go far enough. The key is meaning. Meaning is what sets people free. That's a true big statement. I'll just show you one guy here, Peter Gochke. He's got videos online talking about psychiatry, and he's considered like the most brilliant statistician, medical statistician in the world. He worked with Cochrane Collaboration. And his book, what does he say? He says, you should not go to a psychiatrist if you have a mental health issue. They're going to drug the crap out of you. Okay. A little bit of a contemporary book here. I'm going to show you a couple things before I get to the treatment stuff. This guy, Jonathan Haidt, he wrote a book called The Anxious Generation about how parents give their children cell phones at too young of an age. And the more the kid uses a cell phone and social media, these smartphones, so-called smartphones on the internet, the more messed up the kid gets. The worse their academic performance, the worse their personal resilience, the worse their social skills, their academic skills, the less they read. And I saw this. There was a big argument between my wife and me when my daughter was in grade school. And my wife insisted on buying her a cell phone. I'm like, no, don't do that. And she's like, I have to know where she is. She has to be able to call me. I'm like, she can call you with her friend's phone. Because my daughter was real smart. Out of all my kids, she was the smartest one. And my wife's like, no. The kid needs a phone. You stay out of it. You're never here. You're always working anyways. So she bought the kid a phone. I can tell you, my daughter never, ever read a book again after that on her own. Never, ever discussed a book with me. Okay. And I used to have to go to my kids' room. They would sleep with the cell phone. They would want to have the phone right next to their bed so they could answer a text message. I'm like, get the phone away from yourself. You can't have it near yourself. It's a low-power microwave transmitter. It causes brain damage. You sleep with that thing next to your head. So, and then you take a kid's phone away and they go into conniptions. They go crazy. So I hate cell phones. For about 10 years, I didn't have one. I didn't want one. I still don't want one. It's a long story. I'm not going to get into all that now, but I think they're a bad device. Actually, when you hold it next to your head, it opens up voltage-gated calcium channels, meaning that it has an excitotoxin effect on the brain. Okay, so the best thing to do is use a speakerphone and not hold it to your cell phone. Hold it next to your head routinely. And the incidence of all the mental illnesses, they go up the more the kid uses a cell phone or social media. The incidence of substance abuse goes up, all this stuff, attention deficit, fragmented attention, learning disabilities, on and on and on. This lady wrote an interesting book recently. Her name is Abigail Schreier, and she talked about how the schools are using Freudian psychoanalysis on children. And what that's all about is the unique thing about Freudian psychoanalysis is the focus is on the past, always on the past. When you were a child, did your parents beat you up? Did your brother and sister beat you up? Were your parents drinking alcohol? So it's kind of a crazy thing, always trying to get you to focus on negative things from the past. And it's very damaging because the more you focus on anything, the more you obsess about it, the more you think about it, the bigger a focus of interest it becomes. And it just messes people up. And it's almost like the schools are trying to get the children to denounce their parents. They tell them, oh, it's an anonymous survey. Nothing's anonymous on a computer. The kids filling out a survey about their parents and their family on a computer. It's just gathering information on their family to use against them later. It's insane. It's literally insane what they're doing to these kids in public. So here's a pioneer in understanding this. This lady, Barbara Stitt, she wrote this book. It's a fascinating book. What it comes down to is she was a probation officer back in the 1960s, and she herself was having a lot of medical problems. She was having episodes of rebound hypoglycemia, which she did not understand. They were making her quite ill. She was having some other food reaction problems that were making her kind of out of control. She knew that her mood swings were very volatile. Her family friends were very pissed off at her, and she could not control her own behavior, and it frightened her. She luckily found a physician who knew nutrition and was able to help her. And she got better, and as she got better, she's like, wow, that really helped me. I can control my behavior now. I'm happier. Okay, and she said, I wonder, she was a probation officer. She said, I wonder if I could apply that to my probationer clients. Okay, so she started having her probationer clients undergo testing with this doctor who knew nutrition, where they would test for heavy metals and other neurotoxins. In addition, she started working with them on their diet. And what she found was, she said that virtually all of her probation clients, people who had been arrested and were out on probation, she said they were junk food junkies or they were alcoholics. So they had to stop drinking alcohol, and she wanted to eat whole food. She didn't put them on a vegan diet, but she put them on a whole food diet of plants and animal foods, naturally occurring foods, so to speak. And she got incredibly good results. In the same time trial where there would be like a 70+% recidivism, rearrest rate of the probationer clients, her group would only have 11%. And she would say those are the ones who didn't follow her advice. So she started becoming famous for having the best results in taking probationers and helping them to rehabilitate their lives and never get arrested again. And she claims that it was only about 11% if you followed them out around 10 years. So those are incredibly good results. And, she came out of the 1960s and 1970s. Then this book came out in the early 1970s, The Feingold Diet for Hyperactive Children. And Ben Feingold was a pediatrician, I think in California. And he came to the conclusion after working with a lot of kids. He was also trained as an allergist, that if he could get the kids to avoid the processed food, with the food dyes and the preservatives, the kids did tremendously better. And he got quite good results. And so that was the Feingold diet. And there was some awareness of that. Back then, they called people hyperactive. They weren't using attention deficit that much until in the 1980s. That started becoming popular. And this lady started working in a similar tradition. Her name is Doris Rapp, and you can watch this. This is available on YouTube. She was interviewed on the Phil Donahue show with a whole bunch of her patients who had volunteered to be on the show. She's board certified in allergy medicine and pediatrics and in environmental medicine. She's a real smart lady. And what she noticed is some people just have big reactions to certain foods, also to certain environmental chemicals. And her point was, if you could figure out what the kid's reacting to, what food makes the kid sick, or you could figure out what chemical in the environment makes the kid sick, the kid could learn to avoid that food or that chemical, and the child could often return to normal, or certainly at least not have more progressive episodes, because these episodes would get these kids in big trouble. They would get kicked out of school, or they'd get arrested. They end up in jail. They end up being, polypharmacy psych patients. So she's a smart lady. I read her book. Here's one of her books, Our Toxic World. And I read a lot about chemistry. This is a rather sophisticated book about all the different chemical exposures that tend to occur to a person in their home, in a school, outdoors, etc. And it's basically like a Sherlock Holmes cookbook of how do you figure out what chemical exposure is causing your problem. So it's a bit of a dry book, but it's good. And this is what I'm trying to say. When a person walks into a psychiatrist's office, the psychiatrist goes, DSM checklist, you meet criteria for depression, for anxiety disorder, for bipolar, for schizophrenia, take this pill, okay? Versus what she says is, hold on a sec, you're having a problem. Yes, there's a social context, but let's also check you for heavy metals, for neurotoxins. Let's go through your day. When do you have these episodes of especially being bad? And I think that's a very intelligent thing to do, because you got a chance to hit a home run to cure the kid for life. Why not go for it right in the beginning? Go for it, okay? Yeah, if the kid's going crazy, flailing around and dangerous, you might have to temporarily give them an antipsychotic, but those are dangerous drugs. They can cause a lobotomy pretty fast, okay? Here's another book along the same lines called Brain Allergies. These are the physician and a PhD guy, forward by Linus Pauling. And they basically did the same thing. They claim lots and lots of patients. They don't really have a personality problem. They just have a biochemical problem, either an allergy to some food or some chemical. And there was another group of guys. One of them was Abraham Hoffer. He was treating schizophrenics, let's say, with niacin. And another guy named Carl Pfeiffer doing similar things, treating so-called psychiatric patients with a combination of vitamins and food supplements, etc., and claiming very good results. So this book, by the way, I read this book, and I thought the book was kind of stupid. It was kind of a lousy book. But the reason I show it to you is I'm trying to give you the sense that a lot of work has been done to look into these things, and all of this stuff, I think, is worth strong consideration if someone you care about is diagnosed with mental illness. Because if you can figure out what caused it, maybe it is related to a food reaction, a chemical reaction. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's all social context. Maybe they're just genetically crazy. Okay, fine. But at least give it a try to find a cause, because you got a chance to hit a home run and cure them for life. This is a similar book. This guy's William E. Walsh. Remember the E, just because there's another Walsh I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And he is a Mayo Clinic fellowship-trained allergist. And he also came to the conclusion that certain people have cognitive impairment based on reactions to certain foods, and they would be wise to avoid those foods. And he goes through how he systematically works that out. And I'll also tell you, a lot of these books, you have to give them a grain of salt. Like this book is 50% smart and it's 50% stupid. Okay, this guy talked about his own cognitive impairment due to these idiosyncratic food reactions to several different foods. And then he talks about liking to eat meat in a high-fat diet, which is totally stupid. So what I'm saying is, just like I studied all these geniuses, their biographies. Yeah, a lot of geniuses had something crazy about them, but they also had something wonderful about them. And you're never going to learn the wonderful thing unless you just give them a little slack on their craziness. Okay, so this book I thought was interesting for that reason. Now, here's the book that I think was sort of, now we're getting into a higher level of intelligence on approaching cognitive illness. Oh, and I say cognitive illness, I mean so-called mood disorders, okay? This guy, William J. Walsh, so J is his middle initial. He's got YouTube videos too. You just, type his name in there, William J. Walsh, PhD, mood disorders, and you'll find him. And he goes through, he claims, and he's done a lot of research. He's an old guy. From looking at him, I'll guess he's like in his 70s. He claims he's got over 30,000 patients that they've carefully typed out their biochemistry related to mood disorders and cognitive disorders. And he goes through all that undermethylation, overmethylation, underacetylation, overacetylation, and he goes through parole pathways. He goes through a lot of stuff. I think he's worth studying. Again, if you or someone you care about has a mood disorder, I would check all of this stuff out to see if it'll help you. My other feeling was that by the time you get done testing all this stuff and experimenting with, do you need a zinc supplement? He tends to supplement with things like zinc or vitamin B6 or folates or niacin. Relatively safe stuff. Maybe it's going to work and help the patient, maybe not. but I think you're unlikely to hurt the patient. I don't think any of this stuff's going to cause a lobotomy, whereas these psychiatric drugs are really, really, really dangerous. They can cause a lobotomy. They can cause, suicide attempts. They can cause a total personality change, and the patient get themselves in trouble for violent behavior. They can really, really hurt a person very badly. Psychiatry as a field is a dangerous joke. Okay, so that's all my slides, and I'm just letting you know this parallel universe exists out there to check their methylation status, their acetylation status, their parole status. When I say parole, I'm talking about Pyrrole. It's a chemical. I'm not talking about Barbara Stitt's work. So you can do a lot of things, and then, Doris Rapp's book, you can go through all those things to figure out maybe you'll get lucky and you say, oh, gee, the kid is responding to this. We'll just have the kid avoid this, and the kid gets better. Otherwise, if you just go to psychiatrist, here's your diagnosis, drug for life, polypharmacy, lobotomy, brain dead, never was able to do anything with their life. So I thought that was rather encouraging.
Yeah, you definitely gave us a lot of things to think about. And some of the people in the chat, we have people watching on Instagram too, are wondering, so obviously we're talking about food and how it affects our mood and how it affects maybe psychiatric illnesses. And how would one determine what food or group of foods is affecting them? And is there a process that you recommend?
Yeah, you would keep like a food diary, and you would also keep like a travel diary. Where are you? Okay. Some people, for example, will notice that when they go on vacation, they feel good. So they feel good for a week or 2 weeks on vacation, and they come home, they get sick again. Well, then it's something environmental. Okay. Sometimes a child will get sick right after eating, tomatoes. Well, then the kid has a problem with tomatoes. Don't eat tomatoes anymore. So you have to keep track of the food in the travel diary, and you want to, as close as possible, try to correlate when the symptoms are arising relative to what you ate or where you were located. See if you feel better or worse in different locations, so you can try to figure out what it is. There's a lot of different chemicals you can be exposed to, either inside your house, outside your house, or at your school. Okay, there's all kinds of weird things that you'll learn. So that's very valuable to do. Right.
And so, as far as the timing, though, if you eat something, it could, as far as transit time, it could take a little while before it might affect you. Would you say? How long?
Right. And it can take typically within 3-4 days, it'll be out of your colon. But sometimes the food can be slow to exit the body and stick around for like 6-7 days. So the point is, you can then go on an elimination diet and avoid the most common things that cause allergy. Things like dairy and soy and eggs and wheat, and avoid all that. And then gradually, after you've been on an elimination diet, stay on that for a couple of weeks. See if you're improving. And then also, if you want to add back foods that are some of your favorite foods, you can gradually add them back, but only one at a time, and see how you feel. See if it causes a reduction in your energy level, your thinking capacity. Do you have brain fog? Do you have mental clarity? See how it goes. And you can sort of systematically try to figure out what's going on. And you really want to make a big effort to do this because, like I said, you have a chance to cure yourself for life rather than be stuck in treatment patterns you don't want.
Yeah. And also, if somebody is on a 100% whole food plant-based diet, SOS-free, meaning no sugar, oil, or added salt, it could still be possible that something that they're eating could be affecting them as far as a mood or psychiatric illness.
Yeah, because, for example, they could be spraying something on that food that's toxic to you. For example, look at apeel. Apeel is sprayed on avocados, even if they're organic. It's very commonly sprayed on avocados, and it's becoming more commonly sprayed on apples. And it's clear, it's colorless, you can't taste it. What I would do is when I cut the apple, I would look into it and see, because I've seen videos on the internet suggesting that it soaks into the food. I don't know this for sure, but I've seen videos to that effect. And so you see if there's any chemicals soaked into the food. So you cut it in cross section. I would definitely do that, because I read the medical data sheets on those chemicals. They're much worse than people think. It was listed officially as being like an antifungal. Corporations love to put antifungals in processed food, or to spray it on the outer surface of produce, because it prevents mold growth. If mold grows on that produce, it gets sent back to the company. They lose money. So they want something like that, a preservative. But the problem is it's allowed to have a lot of toxic contaminants, like at least 2 different neurotoxic contaminants and some other really bad contaminants. Really bad. Let me put it this way. Once you understand it, you will never want it. Never, ever. No exceptions. It's that bad.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they don't have to disclose if it's on the food or not. They don't have to label it.
Right, and that's one of the points that I was kind of making. Why did I go through that religious stuff and talk about the difference between atheism and all that? Because I'm trying to let people know, as far as the corporate system is concerned, you are not even human. You are a monkey that talks, and you have no rights, and you tough beans. Okay, so the value of understanding that, and people are a little bit sad when they first hear that, is then you realize no one is going to protect you, no one is going to help you. You are on your own. So if you're smart, you're going to try to learn how to navigate this complex environment we live in. Because what I see a lot of people that are, they mean well, but they're stupid chumps basically. And, they put their kid on all these drugs and their kid's just damaged and ruined by all these drugs. I see it all day long. I see it every day. And it's really sad, and what I'm trying to tell you is do not trust the system. The system does not care about you. The system's designed to exploit you. So learn how to navigate it, and, you'll be a lot better off. You'll have much better odds of coming out of things pretty good.
Okay. Well, Carrie wanted to know if you believe in the theory of attachment styles.
I'm not exactly sure what that means.
I think that's like where there's a psychological framework that it's like how early relationships with caregivers might shape an individual's emotional bonds. Well,
maybe I haven't studied it in detail, so I couldn't understand. But a quick example I give in my life is I came from a very happy family. My parents were very close. They loved each other. The whole family was real happy. It was a wonderful thing. So in my mind, I was just programmed. I got to find myself a wife. I look forward to having a big, happy family. I'll be just like my mother and father. It's going to be great. Okay. But I think a lot of modern women, they get this feminism crap in their mind that men are bad and they sort of hate men. And I think my wife married me largely for my money. I was sort of like a big shot Harvard trained doctor. And I first came out making a lot of money from a wealthy family. And I think she kind of married me for my money. And she was always upset about things because we're going through a divorce right now. And, she had grown up in a divorced family where the parents didn't get along. The father's an alcoholic and there's resentment to the father. And so what I'm trying to say is, I think that to me, it was just automatic. Happy family. My job is to provide for them and help them whatever way I can. Versus I think my wife had like sort of a little bit of this feminist mentality. Men are assholes. Don't take any shit from a man. Why should you have to do what he wants? Why should he be in charge of anything? It's weird, and also there's like a little bit of a jealousy thing. I don't know how to explain it. It's like my wife could never compete with me really on anything. So all she can do is resent me. And it's just sort of bizarre. I don't know how to explain it, but the divorce system also is communist. I don't know. A lot of people don't know that. There's a reason for that. You want to feminize a society in order to push it into slavery. So I won't go into all of this, but so what I'm trying to say is the divorce system totally favors the woman, and that's why 80% of divorces are filed by a woman. I mean, and a lot of women go, oh, no, they have to take care of her. It's reasonable. You think it's reasonable? Let's just turn it around. Imagine that a man cheats on his wife, okay, and then he divorces her, and once he divorces her, he boots her out of the house, but she still has to pay for the house, and he keeps staying in the house having sex with her best friend. With the woman, and he gets to keep the kids, and she has to go piss off and go live somewhere in an apartment. Would you think that's fair? No. Well, that's what happens to the guy. The guy is, in a sense, like sold into slavery. And so the reason it happens is women will have a temper tantrum. They're volatile in their emotions, and then they don't want to admit they're wrong, and they'll destroy their entire family just because they had a temper tantrum. I've seen that happen tons of times. So, but that's why it happens, because it's an effort. Why does the system favor that? Because it wants to take the money and the power away from the men. Because the more you feminize the society, the easier it is to push it into slavery. You don't have to pay money. You don't have to pay money a lot of times to trick a woman into doing something. With men, they're a lot tougher to negotiate with. If you can get them all emotional, you can trick them into a lot of things. So that's why if you're running the power system, you're a ruler, you want women making the decisions, because you can very quickly trick them into stuff. Anyways, that's what that's about.
So Mona had commented earlier when you were during the presentation. She said, he's so correct on this. That's how it is in the operating room when you were talking about the way that they have that time schedule. It was all about volume. Doctors are expected to perform so many procedures in their service per month. So
Right.
she's vouching for that. Yeah. It's sometimes when I just go for a physical exam, because then I can get my insurance covered blood work done. And I see how that can be where my physician just makes small talk about their vacations because there's really not much to talk about, but they're still on the time. And they're also trying to look for procedure codes to tack on.
Right. The more things they can examine on you, the higher they can bill your E&M code, evaluation and management code, the more money they get paid. So they want to drive this. That's why they're going to check more things. They're going to check your thyroid. They're going to check your hair. They're going to check your skin. They're going to, check all kinds of things.
Yeah. So Kim wanted to know, Kim said, when I have dairy, it affects my perimenopause symptoms. Interested in how Dr. Rogers thinks hormones impact psychiatric illness.
Yeah, I would stay away from dairy. There's no animal that drinks milk after it's been weaned. The cows nowadays produce milk while they're pregnant. They've been genetically modified to do that. So their estrogen is extraordinarily high. Estrogen levels get very high during a pregnancy. So when you drink that milk, you're getting exposure to those chemicals. Okay, so they could very clearly have an estrogenic effect upon you. I had noticed that women, like in these Asian countries where they had no dairy, they didn't even initially sort of have a word for menopause. Their periods would just stop in their 50s. Whereas, the women in the Western world, they're having, I'm having, hot flashes and all these other symptoms.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I've heard about also. So yeah, and I would think that if dairy affects someone's perimenopause symptoms, then maybe it shouldn't be used at all, even after menopause.
Yeah, I recommend avoiding dairy. Dairy is associated with tons of disease. It increases your risk of breast cancer. It increases the risk of prostate cancer. It increases the risk of autoimmune disease. It increases the risk of leaky gut. It increases the risk of atherosclerosis, diabetes. I mean, dairy is a disaster. You don't want it.
Okay, so here's something that I know that you're going to want to talk about. Mona said, Dr. Christy Funk advises women in particular to consume soy, clean organic soy products.
Yeah, I'm laughing because, what I see in Christy, I think she's nice. I think she means well, but, she needs to open a book and read a little bit, okay? I saw the study she quoted. The study she quoted was written by the head of the Soy Institute. I thought that was funny. I think his name was Mark Messina. So she goes, look at this study. It says that soy has no endocrine effect, no estrogen effect. I'm like, it's written by the head of the institute to promote soy. I think the guy might have a little bias, okay? And there's a paper, I think the author's name is Stefan Mueller, where people would say, well, soy only affects the good estrogen receptor to help prevent osteoporosis, but not the bad estrogen receptor to promote secondary sex characteristics. Bullshit. If you look at the paper, it promotes both. It activated both of them in about the same amount. I thought that was kind of funny. Soy has got so much bad news about it that regular people don't know. And then what happens is industry, it's $1 billion food. They just buy the journals, they buy the scientists, and they write all these fake papers saying it's wonderful. Number one, it's high fat. It's about 40% of calories from fat. That's bad, okay? Number two, it's one of the most estrogenic foods. It's thousands of times more estrogenic than other foods. About the only thing more estrogenic than soy is flax, okay? So it's super estrogenic. And yes, it causes problems with the female reproductive system in early youth, and it also decreases male sperm counts and male testosterone. That's all bad, okay? It's routinely processed with hexane, which is a neurotoxin for your brain. That's bad. It's routinely sprayed with glyphosate, another neurotoxin for your brain that activates the NMDA receptor. I think it's for chumps. I would stay away from it.
Yeah, that's just something that a lot of people are just so confused about, because so many doctors, especially whole food plant-based doctors, talk about the benefits of soy, and then some of them are talking about on the total opposite as what you're saying. So imagine
you're a billionaire. If you're a billionaire and you have an atheistic Darwinism point of view, what do you say to yourself? You say to yourself, the world is too overpopulated. All these stupid peasants are overpopulating the world and they're polluting everything. There's too damn many of them. How can we reduce their numbers? Okay. Well, if we put F- in the water, that'll reduce their number. That causes infertility. Well, guess what? If we put aluminum in the water, that also causes infertility. We'll reduce their numbers a little more. Let's subsidize soy. We'll cull the herd, decrease the number of these vermin, okay? Let's have them eat soy. Subsidize that. What else could we subsidize? Oh, subsidize atrazine as the herbicide we spray on the corn. That also causes infertility. That's great. What else could we subsidize? Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is these are mechanisms, in my opinion, based on a lot of study, to sterilize the proles. Okay, there's too damn many proles. They're polluting the water. They're polluting also. I wouldn't touch any of it. And look, you can do whatever you want. I'm giving you my opinion based on a lot of study. You can take it or leave it. Okay.
So Mona just wants to clarify, what about edamame?
Well, the less processed, the better, but I still wouldn't touch the stuff. Like I said, it's high fat. It's high in protein. It's still going to have estrogenic effects. I wouldn't mess around with it. I mean, what's the purpose of soy? Like I said, you ever see my picture? I drew a picture of a woman, okay? A woman, she's got big breasts. She's got a Virginia down below. I can understand why she's got high estrogen levels, okay? Versus, have you seen a picture of a soy plant with the leaves? You ever look at a soy plant? Where's the breasts? I don't see any breasts on a soy plant. I look at the bottom of the soy plant. I don't see a Virginia, okay? So what I'm saying is, why does the soy plant have such high estrogen levels off the frickin' charts? Why? Because it's pissed off. It doesn't want to be eaten. Some plants, you eat the bear walks 3 miles down the path, it takes a defecation, and it grows a new berry plant. The berry wants to be eaten. It's a win-win. The soy plant's like, stop eating me. You're going to keep eating me? Well, guess what? I'm going to do something to you. I'm going to make so much estrogen that you're going to be infertile, that you're going to be hypothyroid. Go screw yourself. Stop eating me, okay? You're not going to reproduce, okay? The soy is fighting back with these estrogenic chemicals to poison the animal that eats it. And these stupid low IQ people, they're all eating it and they're poisoning themselves. That's what I'm saying.
So Karen wants to know, how long does it take to see mental health improvements from dietary changes?
Well, I think you'll often see mood changes pretty quick, because one of the things you'll notice is just go to the comment section on all these nutrition sites. And what you'll see typically is all these vegans trying to help each other and say, oh, I learned this and try this. And then you see all these paleo keto carnivores swearing and yelling and insulting everybody. Notice how terrible they behave. And I believe that the high meat and processed food diet makes people more aggressive and nasty. I think that's part of it. In addition, there's something about how tryptophan is metabolized. Tryptophan is an amino acid that's like the lowest concentration in the human body, like less than 1% of all the amino acids in our body. There's like 20 amino acids. And what am I trying to say is, in order for tryptophan to enter our brain, it has to go on what's called like a long chain neutral carrier to be transported into our brain. The more protein a person eats, the less tryptophan makes it into our brain. Tryptophan is used in our brain to make serotonin, for example, a mood-enhancing neurotransmitter. So the theory is that when you eat high-protein diets, you actually prevent tryptophan from getting into the brain, and it causes a decrease in mood, a decrease in happiness, if you will. And what I'm also mentioning here is a lot of these other chemicals, they help the brain to function optimally. Most people are kind of low in stuff that comes from plants. In potassium, they're low in nitrates as precursors to nitric oxide. They're low in magnesium. M for magnesium is also M for mellow. It blocks the NMDA receptor. That's the receptor that glutamate binds to allow calcium to come into the postsynaptic neuron. And so they help prevent overexcitability. Overexcitability in this context, what I'm talking about is they prevent the neurons from being stimulated for no reason. So they help decrease anxiety. And paradoxically, from that same things that cause anxiety, you can also get depression. So your brain functions better. It functions more normally on a plant-based diet. That's just some examples. Plus, animals eat higher on the food chain, so they tend to bioaccumulate more herbicides and pesticides that have neurotoxic effects. That's another part of it. Not to mention, high-fat diets cause a little bit of cerebral hypoxia in comparison.
Right, and you talk about having 10% fat, a low-fat whole food plant.
Yeah, I personally eat a very low-fat diet, 10% or less, and I would say a lot of people say, well, you can make the target of dietary fat, at least keep it below 15%. Because when you start getting up over 15%, you start seeing more and more obesity, more and more insulin resistance. And you can ask yourself a lot of these questions. Look at these Asians, okay? Okay. 1 billion out of 1 billion Asians are skinny back when they ate a rice-based diet. Let's say 1970 in China, Japan, Korea, whatever. They're all skinny. You can't find a fat person. And that's because white rice has 1% of calories from fat. Okay. Look how they behave. In Japan, and this is not that long ago, they said you could send an 8-year-old kid to take the subway downtown at 1 o'clock in the morning. and there's no problems. You could confidently do that every day of the year, they said. And so what I'm saying is, why are they so well behaved? Okay, they're eating more of a plant-based diet. Japan's starting to have problems now as they're having more fast food places and they're having more fried food and some dairy. They're westernizing their diet and they're starting to become fat and sick, and more of them are going bald too. So baldness is a complex thing. I don't really want to get into that. Okay, it's a complex thing, but I think you see my point. The plant-based diet and the low-fat diet in particular, there's a lot of health benefits to it.
Yeah, I personally have found lots of health benefits from it, and I think that there's a lot of people out there that can say the same. But you really have to be, as well, preferably you have to be 100%, because there's a lot of people that have adopted the lifestyle, but yet they're still going out and eating food once in a while that are not plant-based. So, and if you really want to feel the healing results, you really have to go 100%. That's my opinion anyway. Yeah. Yeah,
I think as you get older too, you get more fragile. And the good way to think of it is, think about like an alcoholic. You don't tell an alcoholic you can drink on the weekends. You tell them you don't drink anymore, okay, or you're screwed. Okay, you tell a smoker, you don't tell a smoker smoke on the weekends. You tell them you don't smoke anymore, or you're screwed. Okay, and I would say too, as a person starts getting older, especially if they ate the SAD diet when they were younger, which most of us did, you've got a lot of arteries in your body partially plugged up. You don't want to plug them up all the way, because you plug up an artery all the way, the tissue supply with that, that tissue could die. Could be a stroke, could be impotence, could be blindness, could be hearing loss, a lot of things. It'll diminish the quality of your life. So why mess around? The older you get, the more you should be careful about getting your act together in every aspect. Are you getting adequate sleep? Are you getting adequate sunshine? Are you getting adequate amounts of exercise? Are your social activities reasonably good? Whatever it is, you have to figure it out for yourself as an individual. What is your purpose in life? To help your child, to help the people at your job, whatever it might be. But you have to think through those things to optimize your health. And again, the older you get, the more fragile you are. So the more important it is to have your act together. A 20-year-old can go out partying with their friends till 2:00 in the morning, go to work at 6 a.m. the next day, and be okay. You can't do that after you're 40 or 50 or 60 or 70.
Yeah. Well, Green Warriors, please click like to show your appreciation for what Dr. Rogers shared with us today. And Dr. Rogers, tell us how we can find you and what you do.
Okay, yeah, I have a YouTube channel called Peter Rogers MD. I also, here, I'll show you something. I've written a bunch of books. I've written about 20 books. And, it's Christmas is coming up in a month, and I think this is the best Christmas present. It's called Best Christian Art. It's basically aesthetic Christianity. I went through all the greatest art of the history of Christianity, and I organized it. Ancient Greeks, then, Old Testament, then the Romans, then sort of the life of Christ through, childhood, ministry years, birth, etc. And then subsequent to that, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the so-called Enlightenment, the Victorian Renaissance, all of these things. So that's a beautiful book. And also, I believe that it's important to transmit culture. So I don't just teach, nutrition is the main thing on my YouTube channel by far. That's probably like 4 out of 5 videos. But I'll also teach history, art, psychology, philosophy, and study skills is probably the thing that I was best at. I was like first in my medical school class and stuff. And I had seen that people who learn study skills, they do dramatically better in school. They don't teach that to anybody in the high schools, the grade schools. It's ridiculous. It's the most important thing to learn. Learning good study skills, because then you're able to learn anything a lot faster. Okay. I was done with my medical residency boards in diagnostic radiology, like in an hour and 10 minutes on a 4.5-hour test with a perfect score. I just tell you that because, and I wasn't even a good student in high school. I was like an average student in high school. I never took an honors class. I was an athlete. That's what I cared about. So I just tell you these things because I see lots of people, they're sad and they're disappointed. They don't reach their goals in life. And it's because they don't know what to do and they don't have anybody to coach them. So what I'm saying is, a lot of things are changeable. You can't make yourself 7 feet tall and be good at basketball, but you can make yourself a much better student. Okay. And you can make yourself not fat if you eat a low fat diet, rice, white rice, potatoes, sweet potatoes are 1% of your calories from fat. That's it. The lower the percent of calories from fat, the skinnier you are. So there's a lot of things you can do, and you just need to learn about them if you want to.
Yes, and I am a testament to that, and so is my husband. So we lost over 130 pounds combined, and that was in 2012, and we're still going strong, and we should feel worse today than we did over a decade ago, but we actually are stronger and more resilient. So it is a definite testament. And a lot of my clients are learning that also as they adopt a plant-based diet and lose the weight and also get off medications, which is invaluable. So, Dr. Rogers, I really wanted to thank you for sharing your insights on how food impacts mental health and helping us better understand the connection between diet and psychiatric wellness.
Thanks.
Yeah. So what would your final take-home message be for our group?
Well, like I said, I described a parallel universe. In the old days when I was young, my father was a psychiatrist. All there was maybe go to a psychologist, but they didn't have any respect for the psychologist. You're going to a psychiatrist and they're going to give you a drug and they know what they're doing. Each disease is caused by a different neurotransmitter and the drug changes the neurotransmitter. That's turned out to all be BS. They never knew that to be true. It's not true, and they can't really change it in a useful way. The whole psychiatry field of drugs is bogus. So I'm sorry to say this, but my father was a fraud. And that makes me sad to say it because he was a good man. He did the best he could. And I know what happens is these psychiatrists working in private practice in these small places, they get these pronouncements in the journals from the Ivy League doctors, and the Ivy League and the big name medical centers say, we just tested 10,000 patients and it's become clear this drug is obviously helpful. They don't tell you that the study was rigged and how it was set up. And so he's like, well, it's my job as a practicing psychiatrist. I must prescribe this drug. And a lot of patients get better on their own, and they tend to attribute the patient's improvement to the drug effect, but it wasn't the drug effect. It was a placebo effect. Once they started doing more placebo studies, they would often not do much in the placebo work. They started doing placebo studies. They're like, gee, the placebo patients are doing just as well or better. So I think there's a reason why they were tricked into thinking these drugs work. But the more you look at them, they don't work. And then you start looking at all the side effects, and they try to cover that up. And a lot of these problems at the schools and elsewhere, they're because of side effects of these drugs. They're actually terrible. They're so much worse than you can imagine. I'm not going to go into all that today. That requires big lectures. But watch Whitaker, watch Bregan, go to Dr. Joseph's site. You'll be amazed. Oh my God, how bad the side effects are of those drugs. They basically, like I said, Bregan's telling the truth, and so is Grace Jackson, and so are the other ones, Joanna Moncrief. They're telling you the truth. They cause a progressive chemical lobotomy.
Well, Green Warrior, tell us what you're going to remember about today's presentation. Type that in the chat so when people come along in the future, they can read about what we're talking about today and take another look. And I also wanted to thank Just Task Voice. She did the promos and the thumbnails and the countdown. And Just Task Voice, tell us who's coming up next.
Do you want to learn how to heal your thyroid naturally? Join us as Jennifer shares her powerful journey, recovery protocols, and wraps it all up with a delicious recipe demo to support your health. Wednesday, December 4th, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, on Be Green with Amy Live.
Well, most of all, I want to thank you, Green Warrior, for joining us today. Your engagement and your support make these discussions meaningful and impactful. And I really hope you're feeling inspired to take a closer look at your food choices and make some positive changes to your health and well-being and your mental well-being. Because remember, every bite that we take is an opportunity to nourish our bodies and our minds. And like Dr. Rogers, become the healthiest versions of ourselves. And please stay tuned for more empowering content. Please subscribe to my channel. Check out Dr. Rogers' YouTube and share our message with others who you think can benefit, because together as Green Warriors, we can make a meaningful difference in the world. And as a special thank you to all of you, I'm offering you 5 free recipes. And if you go to my website, begreenwithamy.com/join, I'll send them to you. And they're whole food, plant-based, SOS-free, sugar, oil, or salt-free recipes that I enjoy almost all the time. I have a lot of these recipes on my table, and I hope that you will too. And I wanted to ask you, Green Warrior, if you would like to join me and Dr. Rogers. We're going to say my tagline, but you can type it in the comments and say it along with us. Are you ready, Dr. Rogers?
Yeah.
Okay. So until I see all of you again, remember, be strong, be well, and be
green.
Thanks, Dr. Rogers. Thank you, Green Warriors. We hope to see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Now you can get 5 free whole food plant-based SOS-free recipes from Be Green with Amy. Just click on the link in the show notes and Amy will send you 5 free recipes, motivational quotes, and more so you can be strong, be well, and be green.